Welcome, Bill Sorrell, to CCTV Time Machine.
Happy to be here.
We are doing these programs where we look back at the CCTV archives. As you know, the archives goes back to 1984.
Wow.
And you
I'm
are
sure
in
I'm
the
in there
you're in the archives. So, Bill Sorrell, you're the longest running, is that true, state Attorney General?
The longest serving Vermont Attorney General.
Right,
Yes,
for 20 years.
Yeah, it was just a few months shy of 20 years, 10 terms. Initially, I was appointed by Governor Dean after he, very early in a new term, my predecessor, Jeff Amestoy, was named Chief Justice of the Vermont Supreme Court, creating a vacancy in the Office of Attorney General. And at that time, and for the preceding pretty close to 5 years, I was Howard Dean's Secretary of Administration. Sort of have a lot to do with running the bureaucracy and whatever. But I had also had 10 years of private practice in Burlington and 2 different stints at the request of 2 different governors as state's attorney in Chittenden County. So I guess I had a pretty good resume between the various hats that I had worn to be Attorney General. And
which is an elected office in Vermont, interestingly enough. And you
in
ran often,
45 or 46 of the states, I think.
And you ran often as a D/R. No? Am I getting that wrong?
I never ran as an R.
You didn't have both letters on your name?
No. I think that's wrong.
Okay, good.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that there were some years when I didn't have serious Republican opposition.
Yeah.
But I remember one debate before one of my elections when then Senator Bill Doyle, who was professor at Johnson State, at a seminar on politics, government, or whatever, and he staged a debate for the candidates for Attorney General, and I think there were like 6 of us from different parties, including the Republican Party and the Green Party and whatever, and the complaints about me ranged from the fact that I hadn't indicted then President Bush for war crimes or something, to the fact that I was not in favor of legalization of heroin, I think it was. The only thing all the other opponents agreed on was that I was deficient in some way or whatever. Yeah. But I was successful running 9 times. Had a tough primary race in 2012.
Well, we're going to get to that.
Oh, okay.
We're going to see a little clip of that, but we're going to start. So you were born in Burlington, and you come from a political family.
Political and law enforcement family. My father was a Burlington police officer and other United States Marshal and others, and then my mother was the so-called mother of the Democratic Party in Vermont, when they called her that when she passed on.
And we have a little clip here of your mother.
The late, great Senator Esther Sorrell.
Yeah.
Now Esther Sorrell wants to make a statement.
I just wanted to say that this is a fundraising activity for the Women's Coalition, and it's only $5 for one of these posters.
It brings tears to my eyes.
And it really tells what the Equal Rights Amendment is about. There's the man reaping and the woman binding into sheaves, minding the wheat into sheaves as partners. And I think we have to let people know what the Equal Rights Amendment is. That when we vote in November on the Equal Rights Amendment on Proposal 1, we are saying there is second-class citizenship in the Vermont is right, yes or no. Years ago, 200 years ago.
Pause it there. So that's your mother campaigning for the Equal Rights Amendment.
Yep.
Do you remember that when that was going on?
Oh, yeah.
Where were you and what was going on for you at that time?
Well, let's see. What year would that have been? 19...
This is taking place, I think, in 1980.
8 or so?
86
80.
is the production date. Governor Snelling, Richard Snelling was the governor then.
And I was
And
in the private practice of law.
Spoiler
in
alert,
Burlington.
it didn't pass.
That time, yes.
Yeah.
And my mother was sorely disappointed in that, but you know, she had a rather indomitable spirit and ultimately prevailed. You know, and she was the only woman in the Vermont State Senate for one of her 5 terms.
Yeah.
But she was a great mom too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so 1986, you were working probably in the state's attorney's office at that point, or had you gone on to?
No, I was in private practice of law
practice,
with
okay.
Joe McNeil and the late Frank Murray, McNeil Murray in Sorrell here in
Yep.
Burlington.
Yep. Well, we do have a little clip from 1992 when you had gone on to be in the state's attorney's office. And this is, you can see Kevin Scully here as the chief of police. And this is an Old North End community meeting on crime issues. And we are going to, that's you there. So we're going to see what you have to say.
I've got a commitment to this community, and I've got a good deal of energy for the fight that we're in. And speaking on behalf of my office, I've got 11 deputies with the same or more energy for the fight. And given the number of meetings that I've had with Burlington police, state police, federal officials, and police from outlying communities in this county, I can say very confidently that we recognize the escalation in this battle that we've been fighting, and we collectively have the energy and the will to fight back. But in truth,
You recognize some people in there.
given the enormous
Got Betsy Rosenbluth in the
profits that
back
are to be
there.
made
Okay.
Peter
in
Clavel.
illegal drug
All right.
trafficking, there
And a
are
packed
always going to
house
be
at Barnes.
those who will
What was
step
going
in
on?
to fill the shoes of
1992.
those who may take
Well,
off the street.
I had this
And really, what
10-year
we,
hiatus
police
between,
and
I was
prosecutors
a
and
deputy
courts
state's
can do
attorney
is
in
to
'74 when
fight
Pat Leahy was
a holding
elected to the
pattern
U.S.
and maybe a
Senate.
little
Frank
more
Murray
than that.
ran for, and he was chief deputy state's attorney.
But in
He was
truth-
elected state's attorney, opening a vacancy in the deputy ranks. And coming out of law school, I wanted to try cases. I wanted to get in court, and I was offered a deputy state's attorney position, which I did for 2.5 years. And then Frank left to go into private practice, and Governor Snelling appointed me state's attorney, and I served for about a year in that until late '78, I guess it was. And then I went into private practice. So from '78 to early '89, I was in the Burlington law firm representing regular, clients, everything from real estate to divorce to, but an awful lot of public sector work on behalf of City of Burlington, Burlington Electric, various school boards around the state and such. And then on a Friday afternoon in what was it, February of '89, I got a phone call from then Governor Cunin chatting about our kids. My mom was quite ill at that time, but Madeline was close to my mom, and we chatted, and then I said, well, Governor or Madeline, it's Friday afternoon late. I don't think you're calling me for this, and she says, yeah. I really want you to do a stint of public service. And what had happened is the then state's attorney Kevin Bradley had resigned, I think, to take a federal magistrate's position. And for whatever reason, the governor was not totally satisfied with others who had expressed an interest in being a appointed state's attorney. And so she reached out to me, and I then embarked on from '89 to January of 2017 in
Public service.
Yep.
So here we are at the Old North End community meeting on crime issues.
And this was in '92.
1992.
Okay.
What do you remember of that time?
Well, what I remember.
What does this bring up for you?
Yeah, when I became state's attorney the second time, I barely knew. I wasn't doing any criminal defense work to speak of, once in a great while. But I didn't really know the deputies in the office. But I had talked with a couple of chiefs, like Kevin Scully, over that weekend after Madeline called me when I said, I need some time to think about this, and just asked about what was going on in the county and how they were interacting with the SA's office and where was there room for significant improvement and whatever. And so I sort of jumped into it with people that I didn't really know, but as my deputies, but then got federal money and some other money, and we went from, I think 3 or 4 deputies to 10 at that time or so, and hired some terrific lawyers to help in prosecutions, and I worked quite hard to communicate with the police chiefs in monthly meetings and such to know what was going on out there, to hear their perspectives on things. And I could see myself that the nature of the criminal activity that Chittenden County was experiencing at that time was different than it had been 10 years before. And now we're starting to see firearms and robberies, not just burglaries, but robberies. And drugs were becoming more of a pronounced problem, not fentanyl back then. But we'd also seen that sort of a takeoff on corporate America, where the big box stores will send out smaller stores to satellite or smaller population areas, that some organized criminal enterprises, particularly in the drug arena, from larger urban areas to our south, were sending out their agents, and let's just say they did business in different ways than the antisocial actions of those. When I was first the deputy state's attorney and state's attorney, things were very much changing, and so the challenges to law enforcement, the nature of the crimes and whatever, were more pronounced.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether we'll get to talk about this special sex crimes unit, but that was something that came out of that.
Well, we have
that
a little
era
bit.
too.
You're here in the studio. I think you're talking with Lauren Glenn Davidian, and this is the Sexual Assault Investigation Unit. Let's see if this will play. Kevin, you're hearing this good? You're hearing this well in there? Okay. So in 1992, you came in to have a conversation about the Sexual Assault Investigative Unit. I'm going to just refresh this. And let's see.
Good evening, it's 5:45 and we are on live on Channel 7.
It's very low.
I'm pleased this evening to be here with Bill Sorrell, who is the Chittenden County State's Attorney, and we're going to talk about a number of things for the next half hour, including the new Sexual Assault Investigation Unit. Is that the right title?
We don't have an official title yet, but that's close enough.
Okay, well, maybe we just made one. And you can call us at 862-3966 if you have any questions or comments. We would love, as always, to hear from you. I just want to give two notes, and the first is that the Burlington City Council, which did go on for many hours on Monday night, will resume after this for an additional half hour. So at 6:15 you'll see
I'm
the
gonna
end of the
skip on
Burlington
and
City
see.
Council.
Juvenile delinquency cases, the state police funnel through us.
So Bill, welcome.
I'm happy to be here, Lauren.
Can we just start very briefly by explaining what the state's attorney's office does?
Yes, we're responsible for virtually all of the criminal prosecutions for violations of state law that take place in Chittenden County. I've got a staff of 11. The cases come to us from all of the municipal police departments or the state police.
So you're giving a
funnel
little
through us.
introduction here, and
But when
then
the case is dismissed, we have no handle. We can't get him drug or alcohol treatment. We can't
tell
get
us a
him
little
into
bit
some
about
sort of
this.
an
What are we
aggregation
seeing here? You're talking about
program.
this new sexual
we've
assault
had an idea.
investigative
Yeah,
unit.
Referring
I-
certain of these cases where the
I
victim
mentioned that
agrees,
we would, I started a practice of getting together monthly with the chiefs.
Yep.
And we sort of became more comfortable with each other. There's some very good chiefs at the time. Obviously Kevin Scully, Brian Searles over in South Burlington, and some forward-thinking law enforcement leaders. And the idea came up, we have these monthly meetings and we sit here for an hour or hour and a half or whatever, but how about if we went somewhere for a day and a half, got out of our offices? And so we went to the then Black Bear Lodge up in Bolton Valley, right near the ski area. And but a day or two before my going up there, I asked my deputies, what's the biggest problem we have right now? And they said, we're losing sexual assault cases too often. And it's because frequently the officers assigned to the investigation of these cases, or the initial responding officers in terms of obtaining evidence at the scene that could be used incriminating the suspect or the defendant, and we're seeing very different sort of approaches to sex cases in various parts of the county. An acquaintance or date rape in one town would be filed, brought to us, the victim alleging that this was unwelcome. And in another town or two, we don't see those cases.
Yeah.
And so if we had a special team that handled all the cases from the county, then that would be great. And so we went up there to Bolton, and I kept quiet for a couple of hours, and talking about a countywide strike force in this or that, and there was talk from the chiefs about burglaries. There's too many burglaries, and this and that and this and that. And finally, I said, well, a real problem that we have is we're not being as successful as we want to be in cases that go to trial, and we have to bargain down other cases more than we want because there's some deficiency in the evidence. And quite frankly, sometimes it's from deficiencies in the investigation. And so what if we had a unit of officers from certain of the big municipalities and state police that would be assigned for a year or two, specially trained in interrogation tactics, dealing with child victims, and the like. And so if there's a call that there's a sexual assault in progress, obviously the blue lights go to that location, mark cruiser, this and that. But also the call would go to this special unit. And if this happened in a town that didn't have one of, South Burlington, Burlington State Police, Essex, Colchester, I think that was it. If these are going to be investigated by this countywide unit.
Instead of the town. Yep.
If I was to rank 5 things that in retrospect, I'm, most proud of, that has improved things.
Is this what
greatly.
we would know today as Kuzi?
Yes,
Okay.
and that's the name.
Chittenden Unit.
Chittenden for Unit for Special
Investigation,
Investigations. And
And then what was the role of advocates in helping you see that as well?
That was also, I went to a conference down in DC for local prosecutors and this idea of victim advocates. And
So this is where we would have seen like special like how to interrogate somebody who's bringing a crime, how to listen to a woman and separate it from, oh, this is just bad boy behavior.
and if
Rape
it's
kits, rape testing kits.
yes, we worked with the program up at UVM Medical Center for the so-called SANE program, sexual assault nursing examiners. So if someone came into the ER and alleged that they'd been assaulted, they were brought into a different room, and an expert trained nurse, whatever, would do right by gathering the evidence from that. But what we wanted was sort of an esprit de corps on this, on the part of the detectives in the unit, and knowing that after a year or more, they would go back to their departments and be mentors to other younger officers. And we were mindful of the fact that bringing a victim of a sex crime into a traditional police station, detective bureau with wanted posters on the wall and everything, and it's a foreign world. And so initially the Sheriff's Department got us some space over 40th and Allen in a building, and then thanks to the state, headquarters was built in the old McCullough building on College Street here, Cherry Street, excuse me. And you walk in there and you think you're walking into a nice living room. And
It's a you're talking about a paradigm shift that was built on the work that your mother was doing around the Equal Rights Amendment.
And was going on around the country with those who were more sensitive to what victims go through then and following. And at that time, there were some victim advocates in the state's attorney's offices, but they wouldn't typically see the victims unless and until there was an arrest and the person was brought into court for the assignment. We wanted a special advocate in the unit that would be called right away. Even if it was a stranger situation, we didn't know who the perpetrator was. Really, this is a person for the victim. And it ultimately, President Clinton's Attorney General came here and recognized the QC unit for national recognition. And,
what was their name? Who was the Attorney General?
Janet Reno.
Janet Reno, okay.
And, but, the towns that didn't have an officer on the unit, they had to contribute money for the operations. And so we had to go to each of the, city councils and town councils and whatever. And that's what we were in the process of doing, I think, that when that tape was run, and ultimately came up with this name of Chittenden Unit for Special Investigations, or what's called QC in the parlance. And there was just a...
So we have that Kids and Cops Day with Janet Reno. It's not digitized yet. It's on the shelf. It's a tape number waiting to be digitized. Is the Kids Safe Collaborative, you're here, the Master of Ceremonies at the Kids Safe Collaborative. Is this related to that work in some way?
Yes. I mean, what's the saying? It takes a village. And so, obviously, what the Chittenden Unit is about was trying to avoid sexual assault of all victims, but particular attention to child victims. And so it would only make sense that we would we would want to be working closely, respectfully with KidSafe Collaborative and others.
And frankly, most all of us here in this room have been blessed with the lives that we've been allowed to live. And stop and think for a second how your lives would have been different had the dwelling in which you lived as a child not been a home. That home, school, your neighborhoods were not safe places for you to go.
So that's the
And if you
2004
abused yourself-
award, 2004 awards luncheon, KidSafe Collaborative. So you said this is one of sort of your top 5 things that you would be proud of. You're also known for the tobacco litigation, right?
Yeah,
That came through Vermont.
I was sworn in May 1 of 87, and or no, I'm sorry, 97, and we filed 4 weeks to the day after I was sworn in, and my predecessor, who was
This is the state of Vermont
Yes,
is
joining the
joining
national- the
lawsuit
national-
against Big Tobacco. It was
I think
called.
we were the 22nd or 23rd state
Yep.
to sue. One, I suppose part of the that list of top 5 is these national negotiations were going on, and there was the calculations of what the money would be for individual states was over a 20-year calculation, and all of these computer runs were being done to see what state X would get as opposed to state Y, and you know, there were all kinds of discussions going on between the states. Well, our healthcare costs are more expensive than yours, and this is all about government incurring the costs to treat low and moderate
This is
income.
all based on the fact that the tobacco companies knew for years and years and years that their products were causing harm.
And they lied about it. They
Yep.
said that nicotine was not addictive. And as that litigation evolved and the states got access to more and more company records,
Yeah.
we saw records like internal records. We are, after all, a pharmaceutical company that dispenses drugs in socially acceptable fashions. And one of the companies, because they knew testing their own products that they might well see ugly results, had the research done on their products or tobacco products generally overseas, and the records, the lab records from the results, were sent to the CEO's private house, not to the corporate headquarters, so they wouldn't become part of
The record.
the records. And so as the case was litigated over a number of years there, and the states got more and more access to terribly incriminating records for the industry, they knew they had to settle. And so that when I came in, the negotiations had been going on, but what the final numbers would be kept changing. The industry said, you know, I'm making it up, you know, we'll guarantee giving you $4 billion over X years, but how that pie was going to be cut up between the individual states should be on population, should be on healthcare costs, should be on percentage of smokers. I mean, and every time I saw a new computer run, Vermont's number went down, and I got very frustrated. And then in this moment I don't know where it came from. I said, but there's got to be economies of scale. If we're going to take this money to do advertising, counter advertising, and whatever, the bigger states, I mean, it's going to cost us the same amount to create a TV ad as it's going to cost California. Well, that's an incredible disparity. And the small states getting the least money should be getting more money. And so I said, figure out how many are getting less than $1 billion over the 20-year or 30-year calc. I don't remember what it was. And it came back that it was, Montana, Idaho, the Dakotas, Vermont, I think Hawaii was in there, New Mexico, some big states, but with either small populations or whatever. And then it became a political process that, and there were 15 states that were identified, and we essentially went to the big states and said, you give us a small state bonus, and you'll likely get 15 votes for the ultimate deal.
Yep.
And the reality is that idea, 40% of what Vermont receives annually, and I think
And we continue to receive about $25 million a year.
Yeah, and so 40% of 25 million is what, 10 million?
Yeah.
10 million this year, last year, and next year, with just this idea that popped into my head. And I became very popular even as a young AG in national ranks because of, particularly the small states, because of Sorrell, the Sorrell idea, But then after the settlement, I really worked and became chair of what's called the National Association of AGs Tobacco Committee, and really enforcing the agreement, no cartoon characters, no advertising, highway billboards, no advertising in buses and subways, and no product placements in movies, and all of that stuff, and enforcing that. And I think for an AG from a small state, contributing to that is a way. I mean, we didn't have 1/20th the staff that California or New York has or whatever, but this is a way that, we could contribute, I guess, punch above our weight a little bit, and so I'm proud of that whole thing. It remains the greatest avoidable public health problem we face in this country. Roughly 20% of deaths tobacco related, but the good news is youth smoking rates are way down in this country, and if you're not smoking by age 18, you're unlikely to start.
That's what they say. So here you are with Reps Bill Aswad and David Sharp, part of the Vermont legislature at the time, and you're talking about increased incarceration numbers, texting while driving legislation, tobacco, obesity initiatives, and sexual abuse decisions. This was in 2010. They would have a program regularly called the Legislative Report, and I'm going to refresh that, and we'll just get a little clip of this.
And welcome. A lot of public interest that we're responsible for.
Caller, you're on the air. Hello.
How you doing, Bill?
Yeah. Welcome.
My question is, I'm pretty hard on this topic. Cell phones. I mean, I don't want to see another tragedy happen. Well, I think the guy was on marijuana. I thought it was a cell phone. But anyways, I want to try to ban texting and go for the whole 9 yards, no talking on the phones. If you're going to do one thing, do the whole thing.
So this is the beginning of this texting while driving. 2010, texting while driving was brand new.
Thank you for your call.
Are cell phones distracting? Are they not distracting? We had no idea at that time, right? It was brand new. And what was
particularly the handhelds one, or where you have to be looking at a screen. I mean, if you're driving 60 miles an hour and you look at a one-line text, you drive a long ways during that time while you're distracted.
So how was this information, how was this brought to you and how were you involved in this at this? So what would we hear you say if we were to play this through?
Probably what I said in the Judiciary Committees in the House and the Senate, that banning texting while driving or the maybe hands-free, although there are studies that you're still distracted when you're thinking about what to say in the conversation you're having, particularly if it's a business meeting or something, as opposed to what time to pick up the kids. But so the legislature, reached a.
So you must have had a relationship at this point with law enforcement, or seeing like they're seeing accidents, they're seeing injuries, they're seeing things happen.
And the legislature
that they can't.
Wants to hear from the Attorney General, is the state's chief law enforcement officer.
Yeah.
And so the Judiciary Committees, particularly on criminal matters, would frequently have either one of my deputies working in a substantive area or myself come in and testify in favor of something or in opposition to something else. And this was an example of that, where the law was behind the technology and had to play some catch up.
Yeah. Another big event that was going on at this time is the same-sex marriage, preceded by civil unions. And in this case, you're actually taking an unpopular opinion. So tell us, we'll hear a little bit of this and then tell us a little bit about that. And one of the things here, CCTV and then Town Meeting Television records things in full. So these press conferences.
Benefits and written memoranda.
So I'm going to go back to the beginning.
We litigated that case. We took the position that the Vermont Constitution did not afford those rights. The trial court agreed with us. An appeal was taken to the Vermont Supreme Court. Extensive written memoranda, briefs, friend of the court briefs were filed. The court had all of those briefs as of, I believe it was June of last year. The case was argued in November of last year. The Supreme Court took about 13 months to make its decision. And in a total of a 93-page opinion issued today with 3 separate components, the court has ruled that same-sex couples under the Vermont Constitution are entitled to the common benefits and protections that flow from marriage under Vermont law. The court did an interesting thing. Instead of just ruling as the plaintiffs sought, the court sent the case, or is sending the case, to the legislature. It has set some parameters within which the legislature is to consider this issue, but it has given flexibility to the legislature to enact a law that provides these common benefits and protections, but in the way that the legislature sees fit, subject to the possibility of the whole matter coming back before the Supreme Court to see whether what the legislature has done.
What I find fascinating
in
about
accordance
this,
with the
right, you're
decision
taking a
issued
position that
today.
would now be considered sort of unpopular
Plaintiffs' attorneys,
for the
before they even
Democrats,
filed the
but
lawsuit
also,
There's a backstory here.
yeah, and which I want to hear. And also, you go on to talk about how the Attorney
the
General's
concern
office is
that
not,
this was
has met with the plaintiffs
a
and is
difficult
not going
issue,
to litigate this
certainly a potentially
in the court of public
contentious issue,
opinion. In other words,
one in
you're not
which
going to challenge it
individuals'
in the
feelings
political
can run
arena.
very deep.
So tell us the
very
backstory, and what does this bring up for you when you watch
They
this?
wanted assurances from
Well,
us that we would litigate
lots of
this matter
memories.
professionally, that we
I
would
mentioned
litigate
that
in the courts
initially I was appointed
and not
Attorney
on
General
the talk shows and
while I
on the
was
street.
the Administration Secretary.
I want to say
And
that
there was about a
I'm proud of
3-month,
this office.
Jeff Amstoy became
proud of the
Chief
way we've
Justice
handled ourselves in this
just
matter.
like a week or two
I think
into
the
a new
plaintiffs have
term, so
every
January.
reason to be proud of the way
But
they
as
have
Administration
handled
Secretary and the
themselves in this
state
matter.
budget and whatever being under
And
me,
now say that
Governor
I
Dean
pledge to
didn't want to lose his administration secretary until the
the attorneys in my
legislature
office
at
to
least
try to be of
gotten
assistance to-
into April 1 or so. And but there were a lot of rumors that I was likely to be the named Attorney General. And so Beth Robinson and Susan, who I apologize for, I'll come up with it,
Yeah.
who were
Legislature
the
has a lot of work
attorneys
to do
for,
January, and we'll try to-
not yet the plaintiffs, but they were going to file suit. And they asked to meet with me and said, we're going to file suit challenging Vermont's marriage laws. And they indicated that they were concerned because they were suing some certain town clerks, or certain town, yeah. And they were afraid that if the state didn't defend traditional marriage, who knows
Really
what
think of it in those kinds of
the
terms.
politics and who knows who would be retained by those towns to defend traditional marriage. And they didn't want it to be this thing that was played out on the news every night and somebody on the steps of a courthouse going, the sky is
wisdom
falling and
of that
this is the
position.
worst thing ever and all this stuff.
And
they said,
they've certainly
so
circumscribed, you know,
we think
what the
you're going to be
legislature can
Attorney
do. That
General,
They're saying that the legislature has
and
to come out with a bill that affords
we want
these
you to
common
defend the
benefits
case because we know
that those who are able to enjoy traditional marriage.
you'll defend it on the merits of the case. I mean, the laws that the legislature enacts are presumed to be constitutional, that the legislature has the state constitution in mind when it passes these laws. And so, and I said, don't worry, I won't. It's something like,
So,
this is my recollection.
I just look
Maybe
on it
it's
as a
convenient memory, but
or as a loss. I think what's important is
don't
that
worry,
the
I won't take a
legislature
pass.
is gonna have a
I
say
won't.
and a very real say.
And
And
I'm
you'll play clean and play fair
It just
and
be-
argue on the merits of the law.
we'll try to do
and
justice
allow-
by what the legislature has done.
And in this case, the Supreme Court said, we believe that that this is constitutionally right, but you need to go back and change the law. Is that right?
What they said is that we don't think there's a constitutional right for gay marriage, but we think it's unconstitutional to deny the benefits of traditional marriage to gay couples. And so it was brilliant what the Supreme Court did. I mean, it was difficult for the state and legislators, and it was kind of an ugly process going from there.
And this was after civil unions had already been.
Oh, no, no, no.
This
led to.
This leads to civil unions.
And
Thank you.
the legislature during that 15, 16-month period or whatever decided to do civil unions, which was groundbreaking for Vermont at that time. But, you know, interestingly,
Things like
being the Attorney General, if I decide the laws I'm going to enforce and then others are going to go, well, you know,
partner
no,
or
it's
spouse,
probably
whatever
unconstitutional. I'm not going to do that.
terminology
You know,
to be
whatever.
In the event that there's death without a will, that
Out of respect for
essentially
the
there will be,
legislative branch, they said this is what the law, the state should be, and they
benefits,
deserve to
insurance
have what they
benefits,
did,
the right to visit
given the
patient in
best
the
defense.
hospital if
And
the other
but I have no question. I had what 80 assistant AGs. If we had taken a poll, myself included, how do you feel about
and
gay
possibly
marriage?
the same
I'd be
sorts of
surprised
rights
if
in the
it
event
wasn't
of dissolution of
75%
such,
support.
Yeah.
a relation.
My kids were, well, let's see, probably 8 and 9 or something like that, and I think that day after that meeting, I got home, and so there's a question, so what happened at work today, Dad? And I said, oh, well, there's going to be a lawsuit challenging that people who are gay are not allowed, who are in love with each other, are not allowed to marry. And And so it's going to be a law. There's going to be a lawsuit challenging that, and ultimately the courts in Vermont and the Vermont Supreme Court will decide the issue. And my son said something like, "Well, Dad, gay people are people too." And I said, "Yes, absolutely, they are." And ultimately, at a subsequent election, there were some in the gay community who thought that the fact that I was outright reactionary by defending traditional marriage, being unaware that the attorneys for the plaintiffs had asked me to come in and defend the law. But then some in more conservative circles said, "Oh, Sorrell took a dive. He went through the motions and he didn't really do the right job in the way, So it was
Couldn't get it right on either side.
couldn't get it right
Yeah.
either.
Well,
either way.
this is kind of the crux of the democratic process, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is where
Well, this is respect for the separation of powers, the equal powers in their own spheres for the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And fast forward to today, and with the so-called rule of law being
upended.
Upended or worse.
Yeah.
And what we see today, fast forward 6 weeks from now, it'll be worse,
Yeah.
probably. And who knows where this is going. But I believe in the rule of law, and it's done well by us, reasonably well. Ultimately, segregation and other issues, it took us a long time to get to even where we are, and we still have places to go. We're seeing it now in immigration issues and such, but I'm very worried the path we're on, that our form of government is in real jeopardy. And I think that's.
What would you have folks? What would you have folks do? Where would you have folks pay attention, or
Well,
what kinds of action?
Certainly at the ballot box, but the first time. Well, no, there have been some elections since that. Supreme Court election in Wisconsin, I think it was. Whatever. There'll be some of those elections, but really
And we see that our current our current Attorney General has joined the lawsuit against the Trump administration.
Against our current. I thought you were talking about our U.S. Attorney General.
No.
Whom I served with when she was Florida AG. No, yes, I think General Clark is doing a great job standing up to some of these outrageous actions by the current Trump administration, and now this calling for the impeachment of judges who rule against them, including judges who've been appointed by Trump or other Republican presidents. And I mean, it's there are all kinds of signs that we're taking a fairly tried and true path to autocracy, and that's
Well,
a
let's
shame.
talk. I mean, I'm kind of. We've moved off of the archives, and which is fine, and because I do want to get your take on this, but just to look through, we have you at the AG debate against Jack McMullen, who at the time
He was running against me, wasn't he?
running against you. I think he ran against you a few times, right? And we'll take one quick look at this, but this is down at the Tunbridge Fair.
Yeah.
And here's Mark Johnson interviewing the two of
potential
you.
power that's going to be generated if we say
Walter
okay to
Douglas
this
Brown.
project. So if we hadn't
That'll be up
appealed
to the-
and just left the decision standing on that, it'd be a terrible precedent for all kinds of power projects going forward. And not only in Vermont, but a precedent, since this is a federal court, elsewhere in the country.
Anything you want to add to your answer before?
No, but the record of Vermont on appeal of cases that verge into constitutional territory hasn't been good in the last 3 cases.
We had lost 2 cases at the U.S. Supreme Court, which we had won below. We ran into the most conservative U.S. Supreme Court that we've had in this country in at least the last 100 years. We've won other cases before the U.S. Supreme Court and have successfully defended Vermont's laws when they've been attacked in state and federal
This is 2012.
court, including on appeal in the federal courts.
A
Well
spirited
more than
debate
90%
at
of
the
time.
Tunbridge World
since
Fair.
I've
I
been
think I'm actually behind the camera recording this.
We're broadcasting live this morning from the Tunbridge World's Fair. We're talking with the 2 candidates running
I think
for
that
Attorney General,
McMullen was
Republican Jack McMullen,
criticizing
and,
our
Attorney
loss
General
on the
William
campaign
Sorrell.
finance
We'll talk about
case,
Burlington
trying to
Telecom.
limit,
Mr.
the
McMullen
legislature
was very
trying to
critical
limit
of
the
Mr.
role of
Sorrell
big
and his
money
handling of the
in
Burlington
Vermont
Telecom
elections.
case. This
And
involves
the Supreme Court, 6-3, I think it was, shot us down. But we won at the district court level. We won at the intermediate federal appeals court level on what Vermont was doing. And
This
that-
was implementing new campaign finance reform laws.
restrictions on contributions and spending by candidates themselves in furtherance of their election. So if you had somebody who was a multimillionaire who could self-finance his or her campaign, an undue advantage over,
And I think Macmillan was that he was a millionaire,
yeah,
right?
he was a millionaire, but the same court that turned down our case then a couple of years later handed down the so-called Citizens United case, which has opened the floodgates to billions of dollars of spending going into our national campaigns. And, so, I mean,
So we're gonna-
it
yeah.
leads to now what we see with billionaires in the cabinet and whatever, and that's one of the most unfortunate decisions that the Supreme Court has ever handed down.
The Citizens United.
Yeah.
The corporations are people.
And,
Yeah.
and entitled to all the same First Amendment.
Benefits, yeah. So we have, there's also programs on your fight around implementing a soda tax, online safety for students. Should Vermont reduce its reliance on incarceration? So responses to criminal conduct, that's in 2015. And then in 2016, 2017, you stepped down. Is that right?
I didn't run for
You didn't run
re-election
for
in
re-election.
2016, so
Yep.
my last day in office was something like January 5th of 2017.
Yeah. So tell us, you were beginning to allude to our current situation and where you're at, when you look back at this sort of history, and then, what's your take on what's going on today on a national level or on the state level?
Well, state level, fortunately, we don't have a MAGA governor. And although Republicans have made significant gains in elections last fall, and
In the Vermont legislature.
in the Vermont
Yeah.
legislature, and so that the Democrats no longer have a veto-proof majority in both chambers. It gives the governor a bigger voice at the negotiating table with the legislature, and that's reflective of Vermonters' votes last fall. And I think nationally we'll hopefully look for changes as a result of what we're seeing now by the Trump administration, that a lot of independent and sort of middle-of-the-road voters will reject what is being done and will flip the U.S. House anyway, hopefully, because that's so close right now. The Senate's probably a taller order. But this president needs to be curbed. And the voters, you ask, what can you do? Well, make sure you vote. But in the interim, you know, you see the protests and the demonstrations and, you know, no more of this, you know.
And no more of what? I mean, right now we have like
sending
deportations.
People, deporting people allegedly who have gang affiliations, using a 1793 law when the country's at war against an alleged gang from El Salvador or Venezuela or wherever, and getting shot down, just case after case after case after case by federal district court judges and appeals courts, and the Supreme Court has at least put some brakes on some of the most egregious cases, but it appears that the administration's really thumbing its nose. This poor guy whom the Justice Department
Kilmar Abrego,
says, "Oh, that was a mistake." But
and the courts have ruled that he has to be returned, but nothing's happening. So what happens?
They use the word facilitate, is to facilitate his return. And our current U.S. Attorney General Bondi said that just means if he gets released that we need to send a plane down there to fly him back. And the president of El Salvador is in the White House, in the Oval Office, however many weeks ago, and supposedly the U.S. government that pays them millions of dollars a month to house these so-called criminals, that if Donald Trump said to the president, release him, it's a whoops, he'd be back tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so they're just thumbing their noses, and there are other cases making their way up to the Supreme Court. And I got to believe there's some on the U.S. Supreme Court who regret their decision from a few years back that said anything the president does as an official act is okay. It's immune from whatever. And
because it's preventing his potential impeachment.
So, what the Trump administration's doing is taking the most liberal of interpretations of what the president may do, and they're expanding well beyond that, and then they're going outrageous that these judges should be impeached for making these idiotic, imbecilic decisions and such. But where we're going to be in real trouble is obviously the judiciary, a separate but equal branch that interprets our Constitution and enforces our Constitution. If they issue some direct order or another, they have no military that answers to them.
Enforcement power,
and if the administration says, you enforce it, we're not going to do anything.
That's the constitutional crisis that we face.
Then we're truly in a constitutional crisis. And I think it's entirely, I'm not one to cry, fire in a crowded movie theater when there's no smoke, but that's when the rubber will hit the road. And who knows what kind of civil unrest might ensue from that. I mean, you don't have to have deep and abiding paranoia to be really concerned about where this is potentially all going. And so speak up, vote, and fortunately the markets a little bit have responded to
and protect the institutions that protect the institutions like media, local democracy, Yeah.
Yeah, and
Libraries,
Ooh.
the humanities.
yeah.
Bill Sorrell, thank you for joining us. Ending on a difficult note. That could be
dear.
a whole other show. We're taking CCTV Time Machine. We're taking a look back at the CCTV archives, and we're here today with Bill Sorrell,
My
former
mother
Vermont.
would say, continue the fight.
Yeah, and we started with your mother, and we ended on current day. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
And we'll have to have. You should have your own show next on where we go next.
I'll have to find an agent.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for watching, and take care.